Hi, I'm William Turvill. I cover North America for Press Gazette, and I'm joined today by Emilio Garcia-Ruiz, who is the managing editor for digital at the Washington Post. Hi, Emilio.
Hey, how are you?
Good, thank you. So I thought it'd be great if we could just start by having a brief introduction to you, your career, and your position at the Washington Post, and what exactly you're in charge of there.
Well, my career is pretty simple. I came up through sports and was in sports up until, how long has it been now? I would say 15 years ago, something like that, 12 years ago. And I moved over to the news side, became the editor of our local news section. And then I moved over to digital full time and have been there ever since. Coming up through sports at the dawn of the internet, sports was immediately one of the areas that got the most investment and the most attention in the late 90s for digital. We saw right away how big a deal it was going to be. There was no doubting the power of it, especially when it came to sports and results and video and all that. And so a lot of sports editors picked up on digital really quickly. And a lot of us wound up leaving sports and going to sort of evangelize across the rest of the newsroom. Eventually, I wound up working as the deputy for Raju Narasetti, who was managing editor before moving into this job.
Okay, and when did you start this position?
11 years ago.
7 years ago. Okay, and I was interested to see that I noticed you started your position around the same time as the Washington Post was taken over by Jeff Bezos, and I wondered whether that was intimidating for you, being in a position overseeing digital with one of the most successful digital entrepreneurs in the world.
Yeah, well, the whole thing was surreal. I mean, you have to remember the Post was owned by a legendary family, the Grahams, who were great, who, literally they bled ink. They loved the company, and the notion of them selling was completely impossible for us to believe. And the day we found out, it was quite staggering. It took a while the first reaction wasn't really, hey, we were bought by Jeff Bezos. The first reaction was, oh my God, the Grahams sold the paper. And so it was quite a shock, and it took a while. There was a very long period from when the sale was announced until Jeff took over. So it was like a year. So there was a great sort of winding down of the Grahams and getting ready for Jeff. So at first, the big issue was, oh my God, the Grahams sold us. And at that time, we were struggling financially. We were trying to find a business model that worked, and we had been through a lot of tumult, a lot of layoffs, a lot of buyouts in the newsroom. So it was one more sort of crashing wave in what had been a big storm for like 2 or 3 years.
And I think I've seen previous videos of you kind of talking about him and his vision for the newspaper, and I won't ask you too much about all of that, but it sounded like he was quite hands-on with the digital strategy and kind of guiding the newspaper in its digital journey, I suppose. Is that accurate?
Well, the one thing I always tell people is that there's this sort of vision out there that Jeff came in, the Washington Post was a staid old place. He made it digital, and we took off. The Graham family was one of the first huge investors in digital. The WashingtonPost.com in the early 2000s was considered one of the most, was a front runner in terms of news digital production. We would win a bunch of awards. Don had invested millions in digital. And he had an entire strategy that was built on keeping the website separate from the print product, partly out of concern that the print people would somehow hinder the entrepreneurial spirit of the digital people or whatever. And so he kept them separate. But the digital work was huge. We had, by the time Jeff bought us, we had already integrated both the website and the downtown newsroom together. The day he walked in, I had something, I believe it was at that point 25 engineers working in the newsroom. The issue with the Post wasn't were we digital or not. The issue with the Post was we had a business model that wasn't working. The Graham family had invested in the idea of For and About Washington, which is a regional model, with the thinking, which made a lot of sense, that if you controlled Washington from a publishing standpoint, you'd always have a successful business model because people always are going to want to, on the business side, reach Washington power brokers. Obviously, that model turned out to be completely faulty. The disruptors came in, the Googles and the Facebooks, and were able to take much of that, mega advertising business away. And thus, the business model could no longer support a newsroom of 900 people. And so we started cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting. And we reached a point where my theory is that the Grahams just didn't want to cut anymore. And so they sold, and Jeff walked in, and his big contribution wasn't making us more digital. We already were digital. His big contribution was, you're going national because local won't work. And that was the day he said that to us. That was one of the most memorable for me in the history of the company. Because everything we had worked toward, he basically had us turn the battleship around. And he said, keep doing Washington. Washington's important. I'm going to invest in the newsroom. You can use that to do more national and international. And ever since that, we've been building to this different strategy. We got lucky in a couple areas. Right as we did that, Facebook became a fire hose, right? So we hit that fire hose. We learned from our competitors. We learned what BuzzFeed and Huffington Post and some others did to acquire audience, and we copied a lot of their techniques. And so we hit the scale sort of explosion at exactly the right time. And so we went from 20 million uniques as a regional publisher to what did we get to? 138 last month million. So it really was the strategical change that is what is, in my mind, and will always be, Jeff's biggest contribution. Was he good on the digital stuff? Obviously, absolutely. He's a genius in that space. But had he kept a regional model, I don't think we'd be where we are today. When you look at how all the other regional publishers have fared in the last 5 years and how difficult it's been for them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on that, I'd be interested to know. I mean, obviously, there's been some horrible, terrible stories from across United States regional publishers, UK, everywhere.
Canada's Toronto's a tough one.
Yeah,
right?
They're being very badly hit by the coronavirus crisis, the economic downturn. I mean, do you think? I mean, what do you think's the how is the journalism industry, the newspaper industry, going to be? What state do you think it might be in at the end of the coronavirus crisis or going through it?
Well, I think we're all very afraid of what the state of journalism will be when this is all said and done. I think there are some publishers who are insulated because they, like us, because we have a robust subscription business. But if you don't have a robust subscription business, and right now are trying to get by just on advertising, when, I don't know I've seen projections all over the place about how much advertising is down, but it's very difficult to survive if you don't have something else. We're very fortunate to have a big group of subscribers to help us, and that's going to be, I think, the difference for how difficult it is for some publishers to get through.
What's the latest subscriber figure that the Washington Post has released? Or
that we give publicly? Oh my goodness! I think 1.8 is the last thing we have said publicly. And so, as a private company, we don't really reveal much about our internal numbers.
Okay.
But you can see that it's robust enough so that we have not had some of the difficult. We've not had to make some of the difficult moves that others have made.
Yeah. Have you not made any cuts?
No.
And are you still planning future growth, or is that something that's on pause for now?
Well, I don't think anybody is seriously planning anything right now, right? We don't know what the next 3 months are gonna bring, but we're still actively engaged in strategic conversations about the future. There hasn't been a real change in the rhythm or the feel of our strategic vision because of the coronavirus.
Okay. I was just, before we spoke, I went on to the Washington Post Wikipedia page, and I think quite prominently on there, it reminded me that there was the film about the Washington Post a couple of years ago, The Post, which was very good and everything. And it kind of struck me that to many people across the world, the Washington Post is a really famous newspaper for that film, the Watergate scandal. But obviously that was a long time ago. So I thought, given your position overseeing the digital side of the business, it'd be good just to, if you were to meet someone who thought of the Washington Post as this really powerful, excellent newspaper from the 1970s, and you said to them, "Look, this is what we are now," how would you explain it?
Well,
you'd have to.
I think we will always have the legacy of Watergate, right? That will always be part of it, and people always think of us. So a generation will always think of us that way. What I try to impart is that, what we want to do is we want to keep the values from back then. We want to keep sort of the foundational bricks that were laid by those folks and build upon them in a digital world. And I think we've done that. I think we've been able to take the high level of journalism that we've been known for and move them into a digital space. I think if you look at the Pulitzer we won yesterday for climate change, there were 53 people on that entry, and of those people, there were the traditional reporters and photographers and editors that we always had, but there were data specialists, graphic artists, software engineers, it really, video people, audio people. The entire newsroom contributed to it. And it's a good example of how the goal for everyone now is to take the values of the past, sort of marry them to the tools of the present, because the tools have never been better. And you create these experiences, if you would. Back in the day when we used to write, all we would do was write stories, and if it had a photo, great. Now we're really trying to give our readers an experience, something that they will remember. Why is that important? In an age when subscriptions are the key to success, we really need to give people a reason to pay for us. And the way you do that at a time when visual storytelling is so important in the broader culture, the way to do that is to combine a lot of elements and really make it, as I said, make it feel like an experience as opposed to just an article.
Okay. Speaking to to Molly at the Post, we reported a couple of weeks ago how your the Simulitis feature has been the most read story ever. She was saying that the podcast listening is up, despite the fact that the trend seems to be the opposite for many others, because I suppose people are out of the house less, and so there's less opportunity to listen to podcasts. She also pointed me towards your the TikTok channel, which I've taken a look at. Do you, in terms of your role, do you oversee all of that, and is that what are the most exciting and new fun things that you think you're doing at the moment?
Well, there's nothing more fun than what Dave is doing on TikTok. And yes, Dave does work for me. I oversee video, and we try to have to build into, as you said, what many people consider sort of a stuffy traditional newsroom. We really want to build in a sense of experimentation. We want our content to be distributed successfully on as many platforms as possible. And when Dave saw the possibilities of TikTok, Dave went, and it was a pretty easy sell to go ahead and try it. And he's had sort of explosive success there. We worry a little about him now that he's locked up in his one-bedroom apartment, trying to do TikToks using what seem to be cleaning utensils and various like props around his apartment. So we worry, but overall, that's part of the sort of the ethos that we want, which is we want people to think of, use the tools of the present, tell great stories in the way people expect them to be told now, while also respecting the platform you're on, right? One of the mistakes, I always tell people when they come to visit us at the Post from other publishers, say, don't focus on the successes, focus on the failures. And one of the hard lessons of journalism was that for years and years, publishers believed they could just shove their content onto every platform and everything would be fine. Mm. And what we've learned is that every content, every platform has its own ethos, its own vibe, its own approach, and every single piece must be tailored to that platform. You have to, give the platform the respect it deserves. And all that does is get you in the door to be competitive, right? To win on one of these platforms, you have to be better than everyone else who already understands the platform and is of the platform, right? So it's a matter of thinking of your journalism in a distributed way, and then having the will to be able to publish your content in a way that matches that platform. Mm. So we do different things for TikTok than we do for Snapchat, than when we do for Apple News. It's all a different approach with the same goal, which is getting as many eyeballs as we can. I always have in the back of my mind, since I've been at the Post forever, the realization that a lot of people still view us as a local publisher, the Washington Post associated with Washington. We never really had a broad national play before now. We never had a national print edition, for instance, like others did. So it's important for us to get our journalism out to as many people as possible so they can become familiar with the brand and understand how we've changed.
Mm. Okay. In terms of the platforms you mentioned, are there any? Do you have a priority list for which are the most important, or?
No, it all depends on what your priority is, right? So in some cases, there are some platforms that bring much better monetary rewards than others. There's some platforms, TikTok, that bring you no monetary rewards, but a huge audience. And there's some platforms that kind of split the baby, where you'll get some revenue and some exposure. Where it becomes a little tricky is when you move into the world of subscriptions. How do you use those platforms to drive people to become subscribers? And that's really, I think, where for a lot of us, the thinking is now. How do you get somebody who goes on Facebook to become a Washington Post subscriber and a Washington Post customer? Whereas before, when everybody was playing the scale game, it was, that doesn't really matter. We're playing a click game. So don't worry. Now it's harder. If back in the day our strategy was clearly for and about Washington, as we called it, now our strategy is subscriptions plus scale. Mm. And so that's what we've talked to our journalists about. You have to make impactful work that is unique enough and stands out enough that people will subscribe. And you also wanted to get big scale, because without big scale, you won't get enough people in the front door to be able to sell subscriptions, right? So it's sort of a cyclical, sort of a circle of, getting a large number. Well, it's the funnel, actually, right? Get a whole bunch of people at the top of the funnel, have them fall through the funnel, and a few of them will subscribe. Yeah, we're still playing that game, but we have to do it at a very high quality level. There's still tons and tons of very good free information out there, and we have to be better than that and get people to subscribe. Yeah.
Are you hopeful for the future that young people who are currently following you on TikTok and Snap, that they're the sorts of people that are going to grow up and start subscribing, or would you hope that there is a perception, I suppose, that young people are used to having news for free, and so why would they ever pay for it. I mean, are you hopeful for the future that they might?
Well, there's an in-between step, right, which is the scariest one for the profession, which is what if the free sites don't make it, right? Unless you're tied to a mothership, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, what happens if a advertising-driven model by itself isn't sustainable at any sort of a big level? And then, if that's the case, then you could see a day where you'll have the digital arms of big television publishers, and you'll have subscription-based news products going head-to-head in sort of the final battle. And that would, part of me still hopes, a lot of me actually still hopes that the scale advertising-based model finds a way through this somehow to work, because I'm not quite sure the news ecosystem can survive losing as many more journalists than we already have.
It doesn't sound like you're overly hopeful though.
We're in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, how can, right? So right now, if you always look at what would you bet, right? And if you were betting right now, the news ecosystem that isn't based on subscriptions or a big television partner looks very, very endangered, especially at the regional level, right? Yeah. But that said, as I always tell people, there has never been a better time to be a journalist, simply because of the scale of the story right now. I mean, but the news cycle over the past 3 years has been absolutely nonstop. And I remember thinking, you always wonder, where does it end? And I remember seeing those horrible photos and videos from the fires in Australia. And I remember thinking, okay, this has got to be it. It can get no worse than this. And sure enough, here comes the pandemic right afterward, right? So the news cycle, the ability to tell great stories, never been better for a journalist. The economic model, however, very, very shaky.
Okay. Just one final question, really. I wanted to end on a very positive note, and I was going to ask what the positive was, but you've already answered that for me. The other bit is more of an administrative type thing. But in terms of how COVID-19 has affected the Post, has that all run reasonably smoothly? Is everyone working from home, and how long for?
Oh my God, I've lost track. I think we've been at about 6 weeks, and it has gone far, far better. I mean, I think I can speak for everyone I know in the industry. It has gone far, far better than any of us imagined. I think journalists are not ones to always embrace change. And while we're in the office, the thought of working outside the office seemed impossible to us. And now that we're here, a lot of us are like, well, this works really well, and there's some actual positives to it, in some ways. Now, there obviously are some negatives that we have to work through. I think the goal for all publishers will be to figure out, how do you take the good things that have come out of this? For instance, communication is better now than it was when we were in the office, because you pretty much have to communicate all the time, or people will completely miss, right? So things like Slack and messaging, now far more likely to have everybody involved than before, where it was easy to forget because you had people all around you, right? Some of the negatives, one of them, I think, is that sense of urgency in the moment. We have to go right now, and you could turn to somebody and say, we need to publish that right now. And now the only thing I can turn to say we need to publish is my dog, and that doesn't really help much, right? And so that urgency is lost. But overall, there's no doubt that it has gone far better than people thought. And today the Times made the announcement that they don't think anybody's coming back to their newsroom until after Labor Day. And your first thought is, oh my God, are you kidding me? But then you think about it and you're like, yeah, It's working. There's no real reason to rush back.
Mm.
We can take our time going back.
Okay, brilliant. That's everything I think we needed to ask Emilio. So thank you very much.